Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Unedited Me podcast. I'm Sabrina, your host here. And tonight we have another guest on the podcast. We have Hadassah, who is here tonight. But first, I wanted to start off with a little questionnaire time because we are going to be discussing some deep things tonight. We're going to be discussing when things get tough, when relationships get tough, when we hit bumpy roads, when we're married and we have things that we do not agree with our spouses, or when we're in a relationship and we have horrible arguments. What does it look like to reconnect? What does it look like to connect on a deeper, more authentic level when we have a hard time to even connect on a deep, authentic level with ourselves? Like if there's something that I've learned in the last 10 years of my life, has been to connect to authenticity, connect to my heart, connect to what's going on in my emotions. And my husband and I have been through roller coaster rides of struggles, and we have learned through the ups and the downs on how to connect with each other, how to connect in the deep and the hard season. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome my guest, Hadassah, to the stream.
Hi, how are you?
Well, I'm so good. I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I'm so happy to be here. Honestly, I'm so excited. And when you asked me, I was just like, of course, right away.
Oh my gosh. It's such a pleasure to have you. We were just chatting about how you have your own podcast, but it's a French podcast.
Exactly. It's a French podcast. So it feels so good to be in an English environment too, because I always say I'm not English and I'm not French. I'm a bit of a mix, and that I have an English accent when I speak in French and a French accent when I speak in English.
Yes.
Identity crisis, I think, but yeah, so it feels good to be in English right now.
I love that. I love it. And I love that, this is your first English podcast as well. And I get the pleasure to host you as your first English podcast hosting guest. I'm so excited for our conversation tonight. And so, maybe you just want to, maybe let's just start off with explaining a little bit of your backstory of you and your spouse,
Yeah.
becoming a couple. When was that? How'd that happen? And how long have you been married now?
We're in a month, like next month, the 16th, it's going to be 8 years of marriage. So 8 years of marriage, and we were together 2 years before that. So it's been a while. So we actually met when I was 16. So there's a long time. And like you said, like a roller coaster and ups and downs. In almost 10 years, it's hard to not have any roller coasters, because you grow as a person. You end up there's actually this man that he was married for his wife with his wife, I think, for like 60 years, and he said that in all that time he met her at least 8 times. He met different versions of her, and I think that's really what it is. When you meet someone and you grow together, you're becoming somebody else sometimes in who God's making you become, and you're both like helping each other grow also, and it's to learn how to grow together. So we met when we were 16. And well, I was 16, he was 17. We met at a youth group back then. And so we met there, and he was just a guy that kept laughing at me, and in a really funny, fun way, because I was a pastor's kid.
Okay.
So guys were always very, very nice and very like, oh, hi and stuff. And I'm more of a person, I love to like make jokes, and I love to, like that kind of humor. And he was always laughing at me in a really cute way. And I was like, oh, that guy, he's the real deal. Like, I like him. Yeah.
I love that.
And
So
we were
that was
friends.
yes,
Oh,
and that was when you were 16. You got married at 18, I guess. That's what
yeah,
you're trying to say. Okay. Same.
exactly.
So you got married at 18. I got married at 19. So very, very similar.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that, even with that, there are ups and downs because we're still teenagers.
Yeah, we're still becoming ourselves. Like I can say that when I got married, like I knew him, but I was beginning to know him. I didn't actually, and I didn't really know myself either. So you're at an age where you don't necessarily know yourself to the point where you're like trying to, I just started liking myself in a way when I met him and I fell in love with him and I was just starting to like who I was. So yeah, so then it's a learning curve to then love someone in the correct way when you don't even like yourself to the point where you should.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. So that's where I was at that time. And then yeah, so we got married and now we have two kids also. So
Mhm.
that's another step that makes you become somebody else. You become a mom, you become or a dad, and you're becoming another version of yourself also. And you have to meet that person and be okay with that change that they're becoming also and grow together in that change. So
Yeah, that I mean, my husband and I haven't reached that step in our life, the kids' life, but I'm sure that when that happens, it'll be a whole other version of ourselves, and we'll see each other in a different way. I'll finally be able to get to call him daddy. Um, no, 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 I don't want to do that. That's kind of weird. um, all jokes aside, but I think in different phases and different seasons of our life especially we'll be able to grow and even have moments where things aren't doing so well and we see different versions of ourselves and our spouses and even when you're in a relationship learning how to deal with growing together and have unexpected, arguments about things that you may not have, thought that you would have arguments about. And so maybe if you want to share one memorable argument that you had, you don't have to really go through the whole situation, but something that happened before you got married that maybe questioned like, oh, that made you question like, do I really want to get married with this person? Because I mean, we've all been there,
Mhm.
we've all had those thoughts. So take it away, Hadassah.
Yeah, at one point we were on our way to my parents' house, and I still remember we got in a huge argument, and I don't remember what it was about at all. And
Mhm.
it always happens like that. It's like the stupidest thing. And then we got in an argument, and we got there, and I was just like, okay, so now that we just fought, I was like, do you still want to be with me? And I asked him, because that was like our biggest fight. And I was like, do you still want to be with me? And then he was like, of course. And I was like, okay, so you're not just like throwing stuff away. In my head, I thought, okay, well, some people might just want to throw it away when it happens. And he was like, oh my gosh, no, that's not like what I wanted. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But like, we never said that we didn't want to work on it or something. But
Mhm.
I could tell that like it was a fight of like, okay, well, we're young. We don't exactly know what we're doing in life. And we're
Mhm.
still learning what it is to be like a
Yeah,
good couple.
yeah,
And at that
100%.
point, we were comparing ourselves a lot to the couples around us for sure. Because
Okay.
when you're that young, you kind of compare yourself to all couples. And a lot of couples around us were like, oh, no, yeah, everything's going so well. We never fight. We never. And we were like, oh, okay, so that means we're not supposed to. So that's why when I was in the car, I was like, oh, now that we got in an argument, if we're not supposed to,
Okay.
oh my
Yeah.
gosh, he for sure doesn't want to be with me anymore. So that's when I asked him and I was crying and he was like, of course not. Like, this is normal. And I was like,
Mhm.
I know, but I didn't know, I know,
Yeah.
but I don't.
Yes,
So I
for
think
sure.
that's one part where afterwards that questioning just like made us be like, oh my gosh, okay, so now if I choose to be with you, that means even in the hard parts. And that was before we got married. And that's when we got to have that conversation. And yeah, so it was very necessary to have that conversation at that
Of
moment.
course.
Yeah.
Of course, because then you get married and then you have an even bigger fight because we've all been there too.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Okay, well that fight proved that you are willing to fight for our marriage, fight for our relationship." And now this even bigger argument um is another proof of that, is
Hmm.
um another way that we can continue fighting for what we've decided and the decision that we've made together. And so, I mean, for Oliver and I remember we fought a lot before we got married, because so the reason I think it was because most of our relationship, he was in California, and so
Hmm.
we had 3 months, literally 3 months, where we were face to face. engaged. We were already engaged because we got engaged when I visited him in California. Then I came back, and he was still in California until May, and then we were getting married in August. So we had 3 months where we were just getting to know each other face to face in that
Mhm.
context, which is really different. I mean, compared to when you're just having conversation, you can't touch, you can't see how the person does
Mhm.
things, you don't see how they're doing life, like if they pick up after themselves, if they wash their dishes, you don't see that. You
Yeah.
just see them face to face like we're doing right now on Skype back in the day.
Yeah.
And and that's it. That's all you see. And so we had our fair share of arguments. I remember one of the biggest ones we had was because we had a few, a lot of people did not agree with us getting married, and so but we had so much confirmation that we were supposed to get married. I know that it was God that asked us to get married. I know that it was God that
Mhm.
sealed the deal on that, because we had so many, like, people would come up to us and we're like prophetically saying, like, you're you know we know that in the Christian world we're not supposed to really like give like prophetic words about mates, dates, or
Yeah.
babies.
Yeah.
That's like the thing that's said, like everybody says that. But so many people were coming up to us and saying, "You're supposed to get married. I don't know why I'm telling you this, because I know I'm not supposed to be prophesying this over you, but
Wow.
you guys are supposed to get married." And so that happened over and over and over again, and with very significant people. Like we had Havilah Cunnington give us that from More Revolution. She gave us a word like
Mhm.
that when I was in at Bethel. We had some high leaders at Bethel who gave us words like that. All to say is that we knew that we were supposed to get married, but because we had people who were not very supportive of our marriage, we fought a lot because of it. Because there was like that other side of things of people being like, no, you're not supposed to be where you're at right now. And we were fighting one night, and it was right before we got married, like the day before we got married,
Mm.
and or maybe like the week before. Very, 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 it was like, this is ending and I'm losing a bunch of money, or like we're going through with this
Yeah.
over this argument. And we were on the highway, and I was yelling so much. At the time, I was like one of those people who yelled a lot. I don't really yell that much in our marriage, but I would yell, and I was like yelling at him. I'm like, maybe those people are right. Maybe we're not supposed to. My husband literally just walked into the room. LOL.
Hi.
Yeah, come in. You can pass. um, we were yelling at each other, and I was like, well, maybe we're not supposed to be getting married, and all those people are right. And it is so interesting, because the thing about that is that that deception, it brings deception in the heart of somebody else,
Mhm. Yeah.
and of the person that you're with. And so whether or not you're married, or you live together, or anything like that, saying like, having that, like, well, maybe we'll split up, being there, it causes fear into that other person,
Yeah.
and that's a real shitty situation.
Mhm.
Because that other
Really is.
person is like, well, are they going to leave me? Are they going to say that they're going to leave me when shit hits the fan and we're dealing with crappy situations? Um, and so, like, what I learned through that was, when we're having arguments, when we're having those hard conversations where we feel like we just want to exit the conversation, we don't want to continue, we feel so angry with the other person on the on the other side, that we just either don't want to see them, don't want to be around them, don't want to talk to them, touch them, anything like that, to take a moment and to breathe in, breathe out, and just literally exit and take
Yeah.
a moment of, I need my time, I need to reconnect with my emotions, and let's end the conversation saying, hey, we love each other, but right now it'll get to a point where it's
Yeah.
volatile.
'Cause or
um
else it's just gonna be, like, attacking each other, and it doesn't come to anything because it's not really the root of what we actually want. In the end, both people wanna be right, but the only way both people are right is if you get back together normally, like, if you go back into love, or else you're never gonna be right. Like,
Mhm.
2 people fighting isn't actually, no one ever wins. No one's ever going to win when we fight. And of course, we have to be like open enough to say our point of views with our partner, to say what we think, to say, and not just like fold for everything, of course. Like, I do know I have an opinion and I respect that he has an opinion, and we don't both have to have the same one. We're two different people. So we don't have to have the same opinion. We can
Yeah.
have different ones and find a compromise in there. And this year, with COVID, we realized a lot that, like, in the past, we used to take other people's opinions about their own relationship and about our relationship
Yeah.
and take it as our own. So if somebody was like, oh, it must really make you mad that he goes to the gym that much, then I'd be like, oh, should it make me mad? Because in general, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But now that you're saying it, it probably should. So then I'd get home and then I'd be like annoyed that he's going to the gym that much,
Yeah.
when I was never annoyed because I like having my time on my own.
Yeah.
So it's like little stuff like that too in a marriage, that when you can be open with others, but to choose who to be open with, and not
Yeah.
with people that have like a bad idea about us, you know?
Yes. Yeah,
So,
exactly. That's so true, and it is true that we also will just take an interpretation, as you said, like, you had other people, other couples around you that you were looking at, and they seem to be doing well, or they are doing well, you know, maybe they're really doing great. But you were taking that and saying, "This is what I need to represent in
mhm,
my relationship." And you know what's so interesting is, over the years, I've just realized that behind closed doors, you don't know what the heck is going on. You don't know what's
true.
going on behind
Mm,
closed doors. I've had situations where I met, people, and they seem to be doing super well, but then after, they open their hearts, they're like, no, like, our marriage isn't doing that great, or we're not doing that great. And that's why it's so important to also not have a pedestal to look up to when it comes to relationships, other than like mentors that are actually going
mhm,
to be there.
yeah,
That's super, super important. But other friends that are pretty much in the same age range as you, or in your community, um, to not put them as a pedestal, but to always keep them in that community circle and say, hey, actually, we're here to sharpen each other. We're here to
mhm,
be there for each other. We're here to learn from each other. And when stuff isn't going well, that we're not looking at another couple and saying, oh, but look at them. They're doing great. Like, our best friends are
yeah,
doing great and we're not doing good. No, no, no. It's actually like, hey, what does it look like to be vulnerable right now? Because they have that vulnerability place in our hearts too. So let's go to them. Let's talk to them. Let's open up about how we're doing. And if, you have a healthy, hopefully we have healthy relationships with other couples, that they will be able to do that with us as well. um
mhm,
that's like one of the biggest things that I've learned as well, is having couples that we can do that with, so that when we hit those somber moments, when we hit those harder times, that we have people in our life that we can go to.
mhm,
And do you feel like in your marriage, the those hard times that you, in the past 8 years, I'm sure, do you feel that you were able to, at times, to go to people, and at times not able to go to people? Do you feel like you learned in that aspect, or share? I want to
yeah.
hear.
I actually, in the past, I noticed I'm not like, I am someone who, I don't mind being vulnerable, but a bit like transparency and vulnerability, like,
Mhm,
I'll open up to a certain point to certain people. So
mhm,
I'm always like, okay, this person can know this. I'll give them one piece. This person,
mhm,
I'll give them one piece. And that I found it was super useful as a couple, because
mhm,
there's some couples that can be 100% and say everything. And there's others that I'm like, oh, well, I can say this, but I know that they'll judge me on this and I can't have that.
mhm,
Like, I know that this will affect us in that certain way. So we have couples that we talk to about everything and
mhm.
that we're down to also, and mentors too. And yeah, that's the most important. The mentors that we say everything to,
Yeah,
absolutely everything.
of
And
course.
then our friends now, more than before, like, we started opening up more and more, and we started seeing that people around us actually don't have it like bad things to say, you know. And
Mhm.
when times do get rough, we know who to tell what, you know, because you can't just say everything that's going badly. And I don't know, mostly in a way, you need to protect each other enough in a marriage that you don't dévoile. That's what I have in my head. I can't
Right,
remember.
that you
You
don't,
don't
like, throw up, basically.
yeah, you don't throw up everything. Like you're not like, oh, we got like you wouldn't make a story on Instagram saying like we just fought. He said this, I said this, and give a bad name to your partner. You know, we love each other enough to be like, okay, you know what? We're gonna talk to each other. We're gonna fix it. Yes, we're gonna look into counsel from people around us, but we're gonna fix it. And then afterwards, we can talk about it. For certain things, there's other things that can be more in the open, and other things that are more private because a marriage is two people, but we do need the help to be a good two people, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, like this year, I actually started going to see a therapist for the first time. And because my friend was talking to me about it and I saw how much it helped her. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like you're doing so well with that. And she kept like coming over and telling me everything that was going on with like her therapist and like, oh my gosh, like how amazing it was. So I was like, you know what? I'll like I'll go see her and see. And I loved it. I was like, this is amazing. And then I talked about it with my husband and we were like, oh my gosh, we should go together. She's actually a coach. And then we started going together and we love it. It's like it's a time where it's our date away from the kids that we
Mhm.
talk to one person and yeah, just together. And we saw so much advice in there. And we were honestly like, we should have done this before getting married too. We would have saved so many fights, so many
Yes.
things. Like if we would have just gone to see someone and just being like, okay, you know what? I actually react about this because when I was 5 years old, this happened. And
Yeah.
actually, because the moment that you get into a fight, if the other person might not even realize, but they're not talking to you at your age right now because they're making you feel like the moment when you were 5. So they're talking to 5-year-old you. So you're going to respond as 5-year-old you in a
Yeah.
super childish way. And the other person is going to be like, that doesn't make sense. But their 14-year-old self, because they were hurt when they were 14 in the same way. So it's basically like a 5-year-old and a 14-year-old fighting. Doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
then we started realizing more of this. And so now, whenever there's something, I'm just like, I'm sorry, but right now, what you just said makes me feel like when
Mhm.
I was this age. And I need you to understand where this is coming from and why it's affecting me. So, yeah, like fights that would take maybe an hour now take 10 minutes
Yeah.
because it's just like, okay, you know what? Like, and also just being like, oh, we need to schedule a time where we're going to talk about this, not in front of the kids. We're going to talk
Yes.
about this because earlier I didn't like that, but we're
Mhm.
just going to talk about it. And my intention is just for us to love each other, always
Mhm.
stating our intention because, or else it's super scary. You're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? So, yeah.
Totally. That's so true, and I love that you said that because, that's something that really helped my husband and I as well. We both did, therapy, and we're done doing therapy now, and, it lasted a really long time. It lasted a year, of deep trauma therapy, actually, and that number 1, he in the last year, I think that he I saw like at least 4 different versions of of me. Because, I started off when I was doing therapy, I started off in a really bad way. I was dealing with a lot of past trauma that I thought that I dealt with. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
actually deal with. My parents got divorced when I was 16, and then I got married when I was 18, and so 19. And so that doesn't leave a lot of time for healing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the way and the how I even thought that I was healed back then, um, I don't like it didn't really make sense. I wasn't actually, going through therapy. I mean, it was the best that I could at the time with the resources I had, but it definitely like it at a certain point it weared out. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was definitely more that needed to be done. But um at the age of 25, I was reliving my parents' divorce and like reliving that anxiety, reliving that stress, reliving the painful moments, the arguments, the things that were said. And my husband was just like, dang, like it was almost like if I was living it in the same like last year. Um,
Mhm.
and that it wasn't easy, you know. Those were really hard. They were deep dark moments where I was just crying and I was just needing somebody to be there with me. And then vice versa, and then he started doing therapy. And then I think the trauma wasn't as deep for him in his circumstances because he was able to deal with some stuff prior. Um, in a better way, I would say, or my therapist would say. But just maybe even a different way. And so in his side of things, there was a lot of anger that was coming out. And so,
Mm.
you know, we would be with like his family because usually most of our hurt comes from our family, obviously, I'm
Yeah.
sure. Those are the people that are that your parents are the people that are supposed to first love you. And if you did not or were not loved in the way that you thought that you were supposed to be loved, then that
Mhm.
creates hurt, that creates trauma, that creates whatever. And so, you know, we would come back from some family event and then he would be like angry or frustrated about a small thing that would happen, and or he would be triggered, and I then would have to, you know, I would see a version of him that I didn't
Mhm.
like you're saying, like, you know, teenage Oliver
Yeah.
back again. And I had seen him, I had talked to him, I had conversations with him, but it was him living his trauma, and that was hard as well. That wasn't easy for him to deal with either.
Mhm.
um, but at the end of the day, what I found the most useful out of that process and out of that time was the fact that we did have our therapist as like a father figure for us, as somebody who was able to say, "Hey, you're doing like there is improvement." Even those times where we didn't feel
You
like there
don't
was
feel it, yeah.
improvement, there was somebody who was there who's like, "There is improvement. Your marriage is doing better." And you know, every few sessions towards the end of this season of doing therapy, he was like, "Okay, list out for me where you see growth in your relationship. List out for me where you see growth in yourself." And I was then and we were then able to be like, "Oh, there is growth through this process and through all this pain and through all this struggle and through all this um anger and bitterness and sadness and tears and all of that." And so that's why I truly, and I'm so glad that you said that you did therapy and you're both doing therapy, because that's like the number one thing I tell people now.
100%. Yeah, and I find like it was like a 5-week program thing with her, but we had some alone also with the therapist. And like at the end, she said, "You guys aren't the same couple from the beginning," and we found that was so refreshing because in 10 years, um, we were like of being together, not married, but 10 years of
No,
being
yeah,
together, we were like we did grow a lot, but in some areas we grew apart, some areas we grew differently, some areas we didn't necessarily grow in the right way either.
mhm,
And yeah, so that was like so refreshing because you're like you're gaining back time. You're gaining back all that you thought was actually lost where was never lost in the end,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
Because everything is fixable. Everything is fixable in the end.
mhm,
And of course there's some moments. The only thing though when you're doing the therapy and mostly like stuff about childhood and stuff, like you said, it was like teenage Oliver because you feel the exact same way. So when
mhm,
that happens, you're so triggered because you feel
yeah,
inside of you, your body feels the same shock that it did at that moment. So there's
mhm,
some things, some instances, even sometimes like we can notice, like I for me in music, you know,
mhm,
but if I hear a song and I'm like, right away, now he knows, he's like, oh, this song brings you back to this moment. I'll change it or else your day's going to go down, you know? And he's like, you're going to go on a slope. And then he changes it. So we know what triggers each other also. And like
mhm,
little things, like when somebody says something and they don't know, and we're around people and they don't know and they say something and
mhm,
there's a good intention. And I won't tell someone, "Oh, you don't know, but this happened to me," or anything, you know, and they
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know. People
yeah,
have good intentions, but
of
then
course,
like now he goes up to the side and he's like, "Oh, that brought back something and we can talk about it later if you want. Are you good?" You know, just
yeah,
on the side. And it's really good to have someone who's rooting for you all the time.
Mm.
And yeah, and it feels good afterwards because you know everything about each other. You know all the
Yeah.
traumas. When you thought there was some things, I thought he knew everything about me since we grew so much together. But when we were there, we were like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that turns out that we didn't actually know about each other because my mind blocked out certain events because
Yeah.
I was just like, I want to have a good marriage. I'm going to block out all of this from my mind, you know?
Yeah.
So super
Totally.
interesting.
It is interesting, and I think that like, I mean, it's totally usable for people who are not married or who are in
Mm-hmm.
relationships, and who just or maybe they're discovering what it looks like to date. And they're going on dates, and they're wanting to find somebody who they can trust and who they can open up to. Um, I'm all for that idea of like, hey, if you're not even in the phase that we're in right now, um, to bring the tips that we're saying
Mm-hmm.
into that season of your life. And so, if you're in the dating season, what does it look like to get personal therapy? Maybe not necessarily include the person you're dating, because that's a little touchy. Sometimes you don't know if you're going to be with them for a long time. You don't know what'll happen, but
Mm-hmm.
um, but to go through that therapy, and if you have like a trigger moment that comes up, that you can have somebody that you can talk to, and you can say, hey, actually, maybe you're on your, I don't know, let's say, like, maybe you've been dating for a couple of months, and then a trigger will come up, and you say, hey, actually, I think that there's nothing wrong with opening up and saying that you're going through to a therapist, and that person's helping you, and that thing that they said or did triggered you,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe explain in words, and in explaining your emotions, how it made you feel, and how they can choose something else to do rather than doing something that will trigger you. So rather than saying, go pick up that broom, maybe that triggers like somebody, your parents or your brother or sister, telling you to do things that you don't want to do. But saying like, hey, actually, can you ask me rather than telling me?
Yeah.
And you I mean, whatever the situation is, you'll be able to come up with the right thing to say. But you can bring that in your dating life. You can bring that into your fiance engaged life. You can bring that into your friendships. It's so important to be able to bring those into every sphere of relationship, because those people hopefully are people that you want to do life with. Because if you're in a relationship with a person, or if you're friends with
Mm-hmm.
somebody, you hopefully want to be friends with that person. If not, then I hope that you can maybe find better friends. I don't know. But those people should be people that you're able to reach out to and say, like, actually, you know, what you said, what you did was hurtful, and maybe we can come up with another way that we can have this conversation. Or, and there is a reality that there are some things that will hurt us that are so, that they're literally just triggers, and
Mm-hmm.
it's nothing that person did wrong. The person didn't do anything wrong. It's just because of our problems. And be we have to also be a little bit more wise into how we reach out to people and how we talk to people, because sometimes, like, my husband like can tell me something that will trigger me, but in the end of the day, if he tells me like, oh, you were rude to me the way you talked, well, I mean, it's because I was rude to you the way you talked. And yes, it triggers me that you're telling me that I was rude to you, but I just have to actually deal with my attitude um attitude towards you. um and then I got to deal with that thing. So it's like it's a two-way street in the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah, and to check our tone also when we talk to people, because a lot of the time when we talk, what we say is fine, but the way we say it isn't. Like sometimes, and also, I've noticed that a lot of times when we don't know somebody's intention when they talk to us, that's the big problem. Because sometimes they're like, "Oh, you said that to be rude," but no, like sometimes it's just, "Oh no, I was just asking," and for me, it's completely fine. And then you're
yeah.
like, "Oh, so now like even for friends, I find that." all that made me a better friend, because now I can say like, hey, what was your intention when you said that? And then when they just explain without being like, oh, when you did this, but like, oh, when you did that, what was your intention towards me? Like when you said that, just by curiosity. And then they say it, oh, okay, I thought it was this, but thanks for clearing it up. Now I understand it. Because most of the time, sometimes we end up having fights or not on our own, because the other person doesn't even know you're fighting, because you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even understand it. So that's what I see so many times, because you're like, you think somebody's intention is something and it isn't. And that happens so much in couples. We think we know the person so well that we're like, oh yeah, your intention was to hurt me. But then it was like, no, I was just saying that you forgot to buy this when you went to the store.
Yes.
And then you're like, oh, you keep saying I forget everything. No, you actually just really forgot the
Yes.
tomatoes that I needed for supper. And that was it. And then you're like, oh, okay. Like the intention sometimes, like we need to look at the heart sometimes even more. And yeah, to see the best in people, see the best in the people that we're with, the friendships that we're with. And it takes away so much anger, so much hurt when we just try to see the best and take away the filter of hurt that we've had in the past. Because not everybody wants to hurt us like we've been hurt in the past. Not every friendship is going to be the same, and everybody's so different. And just like what we were saying earlier about like comparing ourselves to other couples, even couples that are doing so well, even them, the way they're doing well, if we did the same things that they did, we might not be doing well, because we're not the same. We're not the same couple. And I saw that with my kids. The way that I talk to one of my kids, even right now, like my daughter's 1, my son is 3, and the way I'll love my son is by playing with cars. If I do that with my daughter, she won't care. Like she'll be like, yeah, I don't really care. So I can't love people the same way either. So there's no like recipe. It's each couple has their own way of loving each other, their own activities. Each friend has their own way also. Every friendship has their, and also like just me with different friends, there's different ways I can love them, different activities I do with them, because or else they won't feel loved in the same way too. So
Yeah, definitely. And how do you stay intentional with those people in your life, so that they can know that you love them, and that you're doing the best in the circumstance? You do have 2 kids, you do have a husband, you just moved into a new house. Those are things that take up our lives. How do you show that your intention towards your friends and other relationships you're in?
a lot of times, like right now, because it's super busy, sometimes like just one of my friends went across the country, and then a couple days later I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot. So I just wrote to her. I was like, hey, so sorry, I forgot like to write to you, but how are you doing? Like, and then she was like, oh, I'm doing well, thanks for asking. And I realized that there's no time, you can't go wrong with being intentional. Like people understand that you do have a life that's intense, and they understand those moments, mostly if we talk to them and we tell them, oh my gosh, right now it's crazy. And yeah, when they understand too, it makes it that, I don't know, if I know my friend is living something intense, I'll be very graceful about it. I won't demand all their time, because I know they're going through something intense, so I won't demand it. But then when we're intentional with each other, just being like, hey, how's your day, writing to each other from time to time, like me and my best friend, like Jolene, we write to each other randomly, and I'm just like, hey, how are you? Or she just shows up at my house. The other day she just showed up and she was there, and she knew it was like an intense day, and she just did the broom and cleaned up at my house while I was making supper. And I was like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I'm just doing this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thanks. Like, and that's her being intentional with me, because she knows it's intense because of my work and stuff right now. And then for her, I just show up at her house random, or I invite her over to sew, or to, those different things that we can do to be intentional without breaking ourselves too. Cause we can't also, put our marriage in jeopardy for friendships. We can't put ourselves in jeopardy for friendships. But the friends that we have to make sure that they're rooting for you in every aspect of your life. So they'll give you space, but they'll be there for you also. So yeah, so I think that, and we've been like friends for, it had been a year since we were married, me and Alex, when I met her. And yeah, so it's pretty cool when that happens, because you get to like be rooting for a couple too. So whenever hard moments we're there for each other, trying to like, oh, like the intention of your husband was this, and like saying
Yeah.
it, and you're like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay.
Yeah,
So
totally.
check on
And
each
that
other.
yes, and that the thing is that that can't really happen when you're not involved in that person's life. And
Yeah.
so, we need to have those friends that are involved in our life.
Hmm.
Um, that's something that my best friend Marissa has been here in the chat the whole time, but that's something that I definitely
Hi.
miss because we used to live, we grew up on the same street. We lived in the same area of Brossard, and then when they got married, they moved, like they were literally 10 minutes away. But now we're 40 minutes away from each other. And so, I mean, she knows this. She knows that I still, I don't love it and that I wish that we were next to each other. But, even though we don't live next to each other, we choose to be intentional with our time,
Hmm.
and that at least, at least once a day, or at least once a week, we get to see each other or talk to each other at some point, um, and stay intentional together. And that's like a big recipe for success in
Hmm.
relationships is having those people that know you and know like what your love languages are. That's such like a cheesy thing to say because everybody talks about that, but the five love languages, if none of you have heard that before, but to know your love languages and then to then say, hey, like, how can I help you? How can I be there for you in those love languages? And so that's so important to have those people who are around, and to have those people that'll pop in, that will do your dishes for you when you feel like you've had a horrible day. And
Yeah. And like
um
just like my sister, we were like that too. We were always together. And my brother too, like we went to homeschooling and then we grew up, and at some point they like my brother moved to France, my sister moved to Calgary. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm alone here." But like just a random voice memo, just being like, "Hey, I hope you're having a nice day. I just thought about you." And it was super random. I'm just thinking about you. Just saying that, just being like,
yeah,
"Hey, I thought about you this moment," or "Hey, driving and this made me think about you and I found it really funny." Just like random little things, even when we're apart, makes such a huge difference just to show that our mindset is still in that friendship too.
yeah,
And yeah.
yeah, 100%. So what would you say to those who are dealing with hardships right now, in their marriages or relationships? What would you say would be the biggest thing that you've learned for yourself and that they could take away from what you've learned?
I'd say to, of course, like go to therapy, which is super helpful. I know that's like super cheesy and like the answer to everything seems, but I'd say that. And if you can't afford it, just spend time together, dates, try to date again, go back to the beginning and trying to date. I find that super important just to try to date, try to have fun without talking about the super serious stuff. Being like, tonight, we're just going to have fun. We're just doing something that's fun, and plan random dates even at home if you can't go out, like during COVID. Me and Alex, we were like, okay, tonight you're planning a date and the next day I am. So our living room turned into a tent, and it was like this
Mhm,
little thing with like, a movie or something.
mhm,
I'd say that's something that's really fun, and to ask so many questions. What's
mhm,
your heart about this subject? What's your heart about this? Asking about
mhm,
the heart, not about how we feel about stuff, but how our heart is about stuff. Like that's so
mhm,
important. Just to be like, hey, when you said this, what was your heart about it? What was your intention? What's your intention with me? What's your intention about this?
mhm,
What would be the perfect marriage for you? How
mhm,
would we be right now if we'd be living the perfect marriage? What would we do this many times a week? How
mhm,
would we talk to each other?
mhm.
What did you not like about your parents' marriage so that we don't recreate it? That's a big thing. We're often really scared to recreate stuff that we didn't like when we saw around us,
Yeah.
and to ask each other those questions,
Mhm.
to just have, we can even write them down, all the questions, sit down, have a date, glass of wine, to
Yeah.
make it chill, or
Yeah.
coffee or whatever you drink,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
just to make it chill and have a little date night. And one thing that we did, if ever you're going to get married soon,
Mhm.
what we did was we wrote each other like love letters, and my grandmother asked us to do that the night before our wedding and to bring them to the wedding. And then she put it with a bottle of wine. And she was like, whenever you want to break up and you're not in it anymore and you want to end everything and you're thinking about the word divorce, you're going to sit down together and you're going to read it to each other and remember why you started it from the start. And I
Wow.
found that was beautiful. So we wrote those, and it serves so well because any moment where like it's really difficult, we get to see why we were in awe about each other from the start, what we loved about that person from the start. And even if you haven't done it yet, I encourage to do it right now and remember before what made you fall in love with the person, or right now, a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I love this person on a random moment of the day. Write down what you love about that person during that moment, which is super important. I say
Yeah,
those are like my big things for advice, to just love on each other in
for
those
sure. For
intentional
sure.
moments.
Yeah, and I mean those are translatable for relationships as well. Just in a little bit different ways, but even writing letters to each other and being able to
Mhm.
read them out and have like an intentional conversation with the person is super important. But intentionality, I think for me is the biggest thing that I would say is to choose to be intentional. Like a little bit off topic, but not really. I have this I have this planner that I use. It's called the I forget what it's called now. The high performance planner. That's what it's called. And in the planner, um every day it asks you who can you be intentional with, who could you give a gift to or surprise with a word of encouragement. And that's literally every day in the planner where you have to write down a different person and you have to choose a different person so that you can choose how to be intentional with that person. You can choose how to be
Mm,
intentional with the people that are around you.
mm,
And so I think that that's a really, really good thing because we need to remember that our lives are so fleeting. Like one day we're
mhm,
not going to be here anymore. And at the end of the day, do you want to be like bitter and angry and frustrated about a situation, or do you just want to choose to confront that person and be real with that person? And if you're having a harder time, a rough patch to confront and to deal with, or
mhm,
are you just willing to just go on and stay angry and literally drink poison as that other person is doing their life and not even thinking that you're angry at
mhm,
them or you're frustrated or whatever? Um, it's so important to reach out. It's so important to be intentional, whether or not you have a situation that you want to deal with, to just be there. Um,
mhm.
and regardless of how busy we are, to have that moment. That's why I loved, filling out my planner every morning, because it prompted me at some point in my day, whether it was morning, noon, or night, that I would either send a message to my friend or think about a friend and be like, hey, how can I like be intentional with that person?
Mm,
That thought prompted me to write um a card for somebody at one point, and I'm not even somebody who really likes cards to be given to myself. um but like it prompted me to do that because I was like, how can I truly love the people who are in front of me? It keeps bringing that question back into the sphere of our
mhm.
thoughts and how we can do that. And so that's the biggest thing for me that I would say to anybody is being intentional with the person that's in front of you. Closing the phone,
Yeah.
having face-to-face conversation instead of, my husband and I are gonna go have dinner now, after us having this podcast, and instead of putting Seinfeld, maybe we can just sit down and have a conversation, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and those are the types of things that I'm talking about, also being intentional, that you can do. Um, and that and yes, I know that, with COVID and with certain I mean, the restrictions aren't here anymore in Quebec in the same way, but there are certain restrictions for certain people. There's the COVID passport and all that stuff that's in there. So there are some people that we won't be able to go to restaurants with, or just
Mhm.
different situations. And so actually choosing to be intentional in those spheres as well is so important. Like
Yeah.
having yes, Zoom calls were like overly used, but having Zoom calls if you can't go out and it's too cold outside, inviting someone over for coffee rather than spending $7 on a coffee that's not even that good when you have a coffee machine at home, different things like that. Having somebody and actually having a home cooked meal for somebody is a way that we can be intentional with people, and inviting people over if they feel comfortable. So those
100%.
are some things that I would say. Um, and lastly, I wanted to ask you, um, what would some advice be for people who are not married, who are in relationships, who are kind of like, I don't know if like in that situation that we mentioned before, like we just had a fight or we're fighting a lot. I don't know whether I want to choose this person to marry or not. What would you say
Mhm.
to those people?
I'd honestly go like I always try to follow where my peace is. Like not my pieces, but my peace is,
Yes.
Like if I feel at peace with something, I'm like, "Oh, okay, like I guess that's where I have to go, because God gives peace when we do something." And that's where I'd go. I'd start with that, like just asking God, okay, what do you want me to do with this? Where do you want me to be in this moment? Is this what you want for me? Is this what we want for each other? Are we going to help each other build each other up, or are we just going to tear each other down?
Yeah.
Am I trying to be with somebody else's husband or that future,
Uh-huh.
is this actually what I actually want, because maybe that person is for somebody else and maybe you're for somebody else also.
Yep.
But I'd actually really, number one thing would be to ask God, even before asking anybody, before asking your mom, your dad, whoever, ask God, is this really what I want for my life? Is this really the person I want to be with for my life? Because he
Yeah.
knows way more than us or any other human, um,
Yes.
what we
Really.
actually need and what they need too. So that would be
Yeah.
my number one thing that I do. That's actually what I did too. Because
Mhm.
we were best friends. So I was like, okay, God, do you really want to turn my best friend into someone I'm going to marry?
Mhm.
So that was something that
Yeah.
I had to ask. I was
Totally.
like,
Totally.
we have a really good relationship already. Is this what you want?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
yeah, I felt at peace 100% with it. And we only helped each other up at 16. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
Throughout the years,
totally.
sometimes it goes like this, but like you have to remember, okay, we have to help each other up
Yep.
every day.
Yeah,
So,
exactly, exactly. I think there's a huge thing of like, "Oh, I fell out of love with that person," which I mean, I don't know how much I believe in that. I think that love is a choice. I think
mhm,
we choose to love people, when and obviously usually like if things are going great, you're not going to choose to not love that person anymore. You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? It's usually when things are not doing good that you choose to not love that person anymore. But it's as you said, having those things that will remind you of why you love that person when things get hard.
Mhm,
And being able to remember like, hey, actually I chose this person. And you know maybe you're not married and you haven't chosen that person for a long term or for whatever, um and this doesn't necessarily apply to you, but keep in mind the fact that if you are going to be with somebody and you want to in the end end up being with that person long term, to remember that when things get hard, you're going to have to remember why you love that person
mhm,
and the reason why you chose that person, and you're going to have to continue choosing that person over and
mhm,
over and over again, because there were moments that like in my marriage, in this, we'd been married for 6.5 years at that point, but there were moments where my husband had to audibly tell me, I choose you in this season because I know that right now you're having a really hard time choosing me, and
mhm,
I'm just reminding you, I'm choosing you. You are the one I want to be with. I don't want to be anywhere else. I know you're having a hard time choosing me right now, but we're going to continue. We're going to continue on this path, and to remind the person, not just be like internally, oh, I'm choosing that person, go
mhm,
the other way. No, like actually, um actively show them, remembering those love languages, actively showing them, I'm there for you. I'm here in your hard times. I'm here in your process. And if you're not married, or you're not in a long-term relationship, or you haven't been in a relationship, to remember that those are things that are going to be key for you as you move forward. Um,
Mhm.
so if the person that you're dating, you don't really like them a lot, I mean, you're not going to be loving them so much when you have horrible times.
No. And also, like, when you're like you said, like, love is such a choice, and, like, I wrote a song about it, like, a while back, and I was like, because so many people at work were like, at that point, they were like, "Oh, you shouldn't get married, you know, you're too young, you shouldn't get married and stuff." And I was like, "No, but if every day we choose to be with each other, what's gonna happen? You know, we're gonna stay together." Um, but I also see that sometimes we're like, "Okay, I can't stay with this person. I don't want to stay with this person anymore, but I need to stay with this person because this person is like my lifeline." I actually see more that we should want to stay with a person, you know, to
Yeah.
be like, okay, we don't actually need anybody else in a way, you know, humanly we do, but we can get through stuff on our own in a way. We shouldn't, but we could. And
Mhm.
but we don't want to. As humans, there's something inside of us that wants to be with other people. So in the end, being like, oh, I could live without you, but I don't want to. And that's
Mhm.
even more powerful than being like, I can't live without you. You know, I always hear songs, I can't live without this person. Or in a movie, there's this guy running and he's like, I can't live without you. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, clingy. Like
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
like that. I'm very like,
Yeah. 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 Oh, no,
yeah,
no. That's a red
I like to
flag.
do my thing.
That red flag meme that's going on Instagram,
Yeah.
that's literally, "I can't live without you, red flag, red flag." That's
Red
the meme
flag.
right
Like, it's more like, for me, it's like, I don't want to live without you. Oh, that's beautiful. Like, most
now. Yeah.
romantic person, you know? And I think, like, this year, me and my husband, we told each other a whole lot, like, I don't want to live without you. Like, I want to always be the person, like, to keep choosing you. I want to always choose you. And
Yeah.
that's even more powerful than not being able to live without someone. Being
Yeah.
like, I honestly could live without someone because I'm independent, but I don't
Mhm.
want to because I want to depend on somebody else as a human being. And that's
Mhm.
how we should also. So, yeah.
Exactly. It Codependency is such a real thing, and, it's only when you my best friend just shared with me this amazing quote. I wish I had it. I literally am gonna go on my Instagram and see the post because it's so good. I'm literally going right now. This is what's happening. But codependency is such a real thing. Okay, I got it. I got it. I got it.
That's
It says
fast.
codependency says the needs of others are more important than my needs. Codependency lies by sounding very noble, sacrificial, and Christ like. Codependency is a form of addiction. It is the need to be needed. It creates dependency. Codependency is rampant in churches, according to several researchers and authors. So it's actually
Mm,
interesting that that even says that because the reality is that whether or not you're a Christian, you can be codependent.
hmm
Um, and you can be codependent on somebody, on a thing, on on anything really. And the reality is that if we put so much importance on that person rather than our own personal selves, our relationships with the Lord, then that becomes destructive in the end of the day
hmm
because we're looking in that person as God rather than
Yeah.
looking at God as God.
Yeah. That's why we could do stuff alone. Cause, like, the
Mhm.
only person that we truly need is God. You know, the rest we have to want
Mhm.
to be
Yeah,
or choose, you know, because
yeah.
we choose whoever's our circle.
Mhm.
Like, we don't choose where we're born, we don't choose those things, but we choose who we keep in our circle. You can
Mhm.
choose tomorrow morning to be like, okay, I'm never going to see these people again, and
Mhm.
that's it. That's a choice, but we choose who we want. And there's something so romantic about choosing each other every single day and wanting to be with each other every
Yeah,
single day.
yeah.
So, yeah.
For better or for worse, that's something that I continue to say, and I'll say over and over again because it is so true, especially when you get married, you have to face, you face those, the better
Mm,
and worse.
yeah.
And it's just a real thing, and you need to continue choosing that other person. So, I hope that you all were able to learn from our discussion and from the conversation that we had tonight. Hadassah, I've loved this conversation, and
Me
I'm looking
too.
forward to more conversations like this, hopefully in our future. Not with a camera in front of us and with digital screens, but like in real life. That would be really awesome.
Intentionally.
Yes, yes, exactly. Because the reality is that I really learned a lot even through this conversation, and it was really such good refreshers that you even brought. I loved what you said about the wine and the letters and having that for like when it's really not doing well. I love that. Um, I think that's something that I'm gonna talk to Oliver about actually as soon as I get off here. But um,
Yay. And
it's
you guys can write it as a date, like during a date, and it's so
yeah.
cute to do. It's so
Oh, that's
fun.
that's such a good idea. That's an amazing idea. We're gonna figure that out at some point, and I'll let you know how that goes. But
Yes.
thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure having you. Um, and I've loved this conversation. If you guys are French, if you are listening and you're a French speaker, go and follow Hadassah and listen to her podcast, Tel Quel. She's awesome. Her and her husband have podcasts together. She also has invites, and they're all in French. But if you're looking for a great French podcast, I think you said that you were going to start doing video podcasts now, right?
Yeah, now we did one video and now we're starting to do more video podcasts, but we've been changing the house up, so we,
Okay.
we have to find new
It'll
places
come
to
at
do it.
some point.
Yeah,
It'll come at some
exactly.
point. But go and follow Hadassah on
Thank
Instagram.
you.
What's your Instagram handle?
Uh, I think it's just Hadassah Robert, so just Hadassah Robert.
There
Yeah.
you go. There you go. So go and find her. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Um,
you for having me.
and of course, so I'm just going to close here and just say thank you so much for listening, for being here tonight on this live. It's been such a pleasure just even hosting your comments here. We had even Hadassah's brother, Sam, here, and Laure, his sister-in-law. So her sister-in-law. And so thank you so much for just being here and for being on the live. If you're somebody who's re-listening and you're not on the live, then go ahead and like, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. It helps so much to boost this podcast and to get it out there to more people. And if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, you can go and subscribe on the YouTube channel, Sabrina Lawyer, and you will just click the bell so that you will know when the next podcast comes out. They usually come out every Tuesdays. So thank you so much for listening, and we will chat soon. We will see each other in another episode. Thank you so much. Have an amazing night, guys. Bye now.